Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Let me see. So, I'm on a book tour. I wrote a book. It was published at the beginning of this year. And so I've been sporadically going out, speaking to communities and things like that. And when I was doing this, I knew if I came to Philly, I could count on Bill's help, and I could count on my friend John Gold's help. And everybody else here, Larry, thank you. Thanks to this space. And I'm sorry to its God for saying the F word so much here. And so John's going to speak first. He published a book this year also, which I wrote the foreword to. His book is called 9/11 Truther. John Gold is a 9/11 truth activist. He became my friend on the internets. Like, I think it was first MySpace. You guys remember MySpace? And then Facebook. And I've always been a questioner of the so-called official story of 9/11, right? Yeah. And the only reason I question the official story is because the official story comes from a group of known and admitted liars. So if we don't believe them on like their justification for war in Iraq and Afghanistan, why should we believe them about 9/11? However, I was very put off by the so-called truthers because they followed me around the world and literally attacked me for not coming out for 9/11 truth, for not believing all these weird conspiracy theories. So while I was for 9/11 truth, I was not happy with the activists until John Gold came with a very reasonable approach to 9/11 truth. Not dogmatic in his theories, or not dogmatic with other people's theories. So of course he's had to take a lot of flack from the movement for not admitting a lot of weird things that the movement says, you know, like laser beams, or a bunch of dancing rabbis did it, or whatever. So he's taken a lot of flack for that. And by the way, we have Bob McIlvaine here, whose son was killed in one of the towers on 9/11, his son Bobby. So thank you for joining us. And so my friend John Gold lives here in the area, and he's a very good friend of 9/11 Truth, of the peace movement, and of the justice movement. So I would like to...
And they've been busted together.
And we've been busted together. We had actually I should say that. We also had a stay-away order from the White House for 4 months together. They say it was the first time peace activists had ever been given, what do you call that? It was a stay-away order, but almost like we were stalkers or something. We had to stay. Just because I went to the White House every midnight and yelled at the president. I mean, I don't know why they were so mad about that. But that was when Obama was president. Okay, I was arrested in front of the White House at least a dozen times when Bush was president.
Your best friends on September 27, 2005.
Yeah.
They came up with Camp Casey.
Like 400 people got arrested that one day. And so about 12 times in front of the White House when Bush was president, I got arrested in Crawford, followed him around the world, literally protested him in Amsterdam, no, not Amsterdam, Vienna, and people are like, hey, Bush is coming, Cindy, come over here and protest. I thought he would legitimately have a reason to give me a stay-away order, but he never did. But I got arrested twice in front of Obama's White House and got a stay-away order from the Department of Justice. And so if you crossed it, 6 months mandatory in jail, like just this little line. They're like, here's a line, if you cross it, 6 months in jail. And so I guess, and after John talks about his book and his work, then I guess he'll or Bill will introduce me, as if you guys don't know who I am. And then I'll talk about my stuff. So again, thank you, Bill, thank you, Larry, thank you, church, thank you, John, and here's John Gold.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I wrote a speech. I wanted to make sure that I got everything I wanted to say out. Good afternoon. Thanks to everyone who made it out here today. I would especially like to thank the following people and organizations who made today possible. Bill Perry, Larry Petkoff, the Tabernacle Church, the Delaware Valley Veterans for America, Brandywine Peace Community, the Philadelphia Regional Anti-War Network, Philly Vietnam Vets Against the War, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 96, South Jersey, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 21, North Jersey, the Bucksmont Coalition for Peace Action, Occupy Philly's Labor Working Group, and Students for Justice in Palestine, and my dear friend and inspiration and hero, Cindy Sheehan. I recently wrote a book entitled 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. It is basically the story of my life and the story of my life over the last decade since the 9/11 attacks happened. Cindy Sheehan honored me by writing the foreword to my book. Unfortunately, the book is only available in Kindle format at the moment, so if you want to buy a copy, you have to go to Amazon and get a free Kindle reader. I'm hoping eventually to have a hard copy made. I'm only charging $6 for it, but if you're a student or simply can't afford one, just let me know and I'll take care of it. I always envisioned writing a book about the fight for 9/11 justice, but I expected that it would happen after everything was said and done. However, that didn't look like it was going to happen anytime soon, so I decided it was too important not to write now. I believe people needed to know the story of this fight. It wasn't my fight alone. In fact, I wasn't even a participant in this fight early on. I participated in what Dr. Michael Parenti refers to as the patriotic binge. I wanted revenge for what happened, just like most other Americans. I wanted to bomb the shit out of the Middle East. I wanted the terrorists, which in my mind at the time included all Arabs, to pay for what they had done. I was as ignorant, if not more so, than most Americans at the time of the 9/11 attacks. I was terrified about it happening again, and I became addicted to the TV news. I had to know what was going to happen next. Unfortunately, I picked Fox News as my news channel of choice because they were the red, whitest, and bluest. I was never political before 9/11. I had never cared about politicians or the policies of the U.S. government prior to the 9/11 atrocities. As I said, this wasn't always my fight. Very early on, people in New York gathered in churches to be with people who experienced loss on that day. Like anything as bad as 9/11, you would expect that people eventually start to ask questions about how and why the attacks occurred. People who lost someone that day started asking questions and had every right to do so. There were also others who questioned things early on, political activists who have been following the actions of the U.S. government for very many years. It is the people of New York, the family members who lost someone that day, and the veteran political activists that started this cause early on. On the day of 9/11, I did have one question about what happened, and that question was, after the Pentagon was struck, I asked my friend at work, where the hell is our military? I didn't really think about it much after the attacks. It wasn't until January 2002 when I started to pay closer attention to the news regarding 9/11. In January 2002, George Bush and Dick Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office and asked him to limit the scope of the investigations into 9/11. That was according to CNN. According to Tom Daschle, when asked by Tim Russert, and the following is quotations from a conversation that they had. Mr. Russert, so both the President and the Vice President urged you not to have an investigation of the events of 9/11? Senator Daschle, correct. Mr. Russert, you're absolutely convinced of that? Senator Daschle, I can give you the dates I have. Mr. Russert, what words did they use? Senator Daschle, well, I don't recall the exact words, but the motivation was that they didn't want to take people off of the effort to try to win the war on terror. They were concerned about the diversion of resources, the diversion of manpower in particular, and that was the reason given to me by both the President and the Vice President about their concerns involving an investigation of any kind. Mr. Russert, so it wasn't, let's not have a national commission, but let's have the intelligence committees look into this. It was no investigation by anyone, period. Senator Daschle, that's correct. That's the end of their conversation. In my mind, I thought, why would the President and the Vice President of all people not want to know exactly how and why this happened so as to make sure it could never happen again? However, even though I heard this news, I was still pretty much involved in the patriotic binge. I started the job at a new company in 2002, and I made sure to post an American flag on their website when I got to the company. Just so you know, my friend Michael Jackman, who is a co-founder for Student Scholars for 9/11 Truth, spoke to Tom Daschle and confirmed everything that was just said. It wasn't until May of 2002 when news of the August 6th PDD came out and I saw how the families had to fight for an investigation that I really started to become interested and involved. If you remember, after 9/11, we were told repeatedly that the government had no warnings that the attacks would take place. We were told repeatedly that the government had no idea that anything like that could occur. These were lies. In the August 6, 2001 presidential daily briefing that George Bush received in Crawford, Texas while on vacation is only one example of this. I'm not going to go through the massive archives of warnings the Bush administration received before 9/11. I'm not going to go through the massive archives of people telling us that there were no warnings and that nobody in government had any idea that this was going to happen. Instead, I'm going to read a quote to you from 9/11 family member Patty Casaza. Before I do that, though, I'm going to give you a brief history of the Jersey Girls, of which Patty was a part of. As I said, after the 9/11 attacks, the family members started asking questions about what happened. 4 of those family members, Kristen Brotweiser, Lori Van Auken, Mindy Kleinberg, and Patty Casaza, were the most outspoken with regards to these questions. They all lost their husbands on 9/11, and they were greatly responsible for making sure the questions of the family members were heard. They became known informally as the Jersey Girls, but their group is known as the September 11th Advocates. 9/11 family member Monica Gabrielle is also among their group. When the 9/11 Commission started their work, these family members, along with others, started what was called the 9/11 Family Steering Committee. They provided hundreds of well-researched questions for the 9/11 Commission to answer. They worked alongside the staffers of the 9/11 Commission. They attended every hearing of the 9/11 Commission. The chairman of the 9/11 Commission, Thomas Keene, said, quote, "They monitor us, they follow our progress, they've supplied us with some of the best questions we've asked. I doubt very much we would be in existence without them," end quote. Now, in November 2007, there was a conference held in West Hartford, Connecticut. At that conference, 9/11 family member Patty Casaza surprised us by attending. She, along with 9/11 family member Bob McElveen, were kind enough to tell us about their experiences with the 9/11 Commission. Patty told us about 9/11 whistleblower Sibel Edmonds and other whistleblowers that were either ignored or censored by the 9/11 Commission. Here's the quote that I wanted to read from Patty. Quote, "We met other whistleblowers on the side of the road in Maryland, to hear what they could tell us. None of them revealed state secrets to us, by the way, but they had information. And basically, the government knew. Other than the exact moment, they knew the date and the method of which the attacks were supposed to come." End quote. This brings me to one of my favorite subjects, the 9/11 Commission. But before I talk about the 9/11 Commission, I want to talk a little bit about the families that lost someone that day. In September 2004, I heard Bob McElvain cry on the stage in New York City, talking about why he is involved in this fight. That broke my heart. Ever since then, I vowed to make sure that the family members got the justice they so richly deserve. I have said very often that I understand the anger that I feel when I read about 9/11 and see the different lies, but I can't possibly imagine what it's like to be someone that knows what I do, on top of having lost someone that day. To see the names of their loved ones used to do horrific things around this country and the world, all the while not knowing what happened to their loved ones or who was ultimately responsible. It is unimaginable to me, and it is part of what drives me. They deserve better than what they got. We all do. Now, the 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission was mandated to, quote, provide a full and complete accounting of the attacks of September 11, 2001, and recommendations as to how to prevent such attacks in the future, end quote. Everything they omitted from their report, like the previously mentioned whistleblowers that were ignored and censored, shows that they failed with their mandate. And believe me, they omitted many things from their report. The 9/11 Commission had many conflicts of interest with its commissioners. My favorite is the fact that Lee Hamilton, the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission, was greatly responsible for previous cover-ups having to do with the Iran-Contra affair and the October surprise. Also, he is good friends with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. He shouldn't have been anywhere near the 9/11 Commission. The biggest conflict of interest had to do with the 9/11 Commission's Executive Director, Philip Zelikow. Paul Sperry explained, quote, though he has no vote, Zelikow arguably has more sway than any member, including the chairman. Zelikow picks the areas of investigation, the briefing materials, the topics for hearings, the witnesses, and the lines of questioning for witnesses. In effect, he sets the agenda and runs the investigation, end quote. In 1995, Zelikow wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice called Germany Unified and Europe Transformed, a study in statecraft. In 1997, Zelikow and Ernest May wrote a report about John F. Kennedy that was riddled with errors. Zelikow wrote the preemptive war strategy for the Bush administration. Zelikow tried to prevent 9/11 Commission staffers from talking to the commissioners. Zelikow tried to insert a false connection between Iraq and 9/11 into the 9/11 report, but the families and the staffers fought against it. Select staffers of the 9/11 Commission dispute this account, though Zelikow ultimately had to approve Laurie Milroy's testimony before the 9/11 Commission. She was the one pushing the Iraq thing. It has been alleged that he took direction from Karl Rove, who, according to Phil Sheehan, was concerned about the 9/11 Commission because, quote, in the wrong hands, it could cost President Bush a second term, end quote. In early 2003, Philip Zelikow and Ernest May wrote a complete outline of the final 9/11 report. Zelikow, Keene, and Hamilton decided to keep this outline a secret from the Commission staffers. When, quote, it was later disclosed that Zelikow had prepared a detailed outline of the Commission's final report at the very start of the investigation, many of the staff's investigators were alarmed, end quote. He rewrote the 9/11 report to be more favorable of Condoleezza Rice. Zelikow refused to approve half of the interview requests for Saudi connection investigations. He blocked investigators from accessing the 28 redacted pages of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, and then fired investigator Dana Leisman after she tried to get the pages through a back channel. In June 2004, Philip Zelikow and Dieter Snell took part in a, quote, late-night editing session, end quote, to delete passages of the 9/11 report having to do with Saudi support for the hijackers. During the time of the 9/11 Commission, the families called for the resignation of Philip Zelikow but were denied that request. After the 9/11 Commission was finished, Philip Zelikow was given a job with Condoleezza Rice at the State Department. On October 9th, 2010, during Freedom Watch with Judge Napolitano, 9/11 whistleblower Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer alleged that during the lunch in Philadelphia, a 9/11 commissioner told him that, quote, everybody on the commission was covering for someone, end quote. The following week, Judge Napolitano asked Philip Zelikow to appear on the show to talk about this. He refused. On September 7th, 2011, it was reported that, quote, President Obama appointed Philip Zelikow to serve on the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, end quote. The 9/11 Commission was underfunded. It had a very limited amount of time, and even Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton admitted in their book that they were, quote, set up to fail. The 9/11 Commission was a farce, and yet was sold to the world as the definitive account of 9/11. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, some may ask, why hasn't the media reported on any of the discrepancies regarding 9/11 and the 9/11 Commission? Very simply, the media in this country does not work for the people. It sometimes reports on the news, but it never puts the pieces together, and it never, ever asks the tough questions. It doesn't give certain things the attention that Hannah Nicole Smith, Michael Jackson's death, the Ground Zero Mosque, and other things get. With regards to the cover-up of 9/11, it seems that the media's job has been to slander and attack anyone that questions the official account of 9/11. For years, the media ignored our efforts. Around 2005, 2006, they finally started to give us coverage, but for the most part, they focused on the fringe of the 9/11 truth movement in an effort to paint the whole as such. They did anything and everything within their power to make a 9/11 truther the equivalent of a baby killer or a dog torturer. Now, because of this, many progressives that you would think would be very vocal about 9/11 have been made silent. They want to maintain their pulpits and don't want to be painted with the 9/11 truth brush. Personally, I think it is very sad when a so-called progressive lets the media dictate what they will or won't talk about. Personally, I think that if progressives did start speaking out about 9/11, their popularity among the people would increase. When I say the media doesn't give certain things the attention it deserves, I'm going to give you two examples. On September 11th, 2006, 9/11 family members Donna Marsh O'Connor, Christina Kamenek, and Michelle Little got together at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. to call for a new investigation. Only one news outlet in the country covered this. In February 2008, the Jersey Girls called for an entirely new investigation after the allegations regarding Karl Rove and Philip Zelikow surfaced. Only one news outlet in the country covered this. Do you think these are things that you should have known about? Do you think these are things that are considered newsworthy? The media used to say that people like me were dishonoring the family members. I can't think of anything more dishonoring than ignoring their pleas for real justice. If we had a media in this country that did its job, I wouldn't have to do what I do. So, shame on the media. So what is a 9/11 truther? I am the one that coined that phrase, so I get to decide its meaning, and not the media. In an article I wrote entitled, "What is a 9/11 truther?" that was cited by the New York Times, I wrote that in my mind, quote, "A 9/11 truther is someone who fights alongside the family members seeking truth and accountability for the 9/11 attacks." In my mind, a 9/11 truther is someone who fights for the sick and dying 9/11 first responders who need health care desperately. In my mind, a 9/11 truther is someone who does not like how the day of 9/11 is being used to inflict pain and suffering around the world and is trying to stop it. Stop it by using the truth, something we've been denied by our government regarding the 9/11 attacks. End quote. The bottom line is this: if you wince at the phrase 9/11 truther or hate 9/11 truthers, it's because you've been watching too much television. The 9/11 truth movement does have many problems. For instance, years ago our signs used to say, support the 9/11 families, ask questions, demand answers. Eventually, people in what I call the conspiracy theory industry started to get their mitts into the movement, and our signs would say things like, New World Order, and false flag attack, and 9/11 was an inside job. When you're trying to reach a majority of people, it is best to use information that doesn't sound crazy to the masses. There are many in the 9/11 truth movement who push theory as fact. There are many who create litmus tests for any given theory, and if you don't believe this theory, you are a this or a that. There's also been what appears to be legitimate infiltrations of the movement. As Thomas Pynchon said, quote, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about answers, end quote. Now, with regards to theories, when you're not being given answers to your questions, it is human nature to theorize as to the reasons why. However, theories are not fact. I think the real facts speak for themselves and don't require any theories. That is why I wrote an article entitled The Facts Speak for Themselves, which is available in my book. Other problems we face come in the form of death threats, slanders, accusations, crank phone calls, and agenda-driven debunkers. Suffice it to say, it has not been easy. Now, why is it important to get the story right about 9/11? Raise your hand if you can tell me some of the changes that have occurred since the 9/11 attacks. Go ahead.
The Patriot Act.
Patriot Act? Wow.
Surveillance state, police state,
Yep.
restriction of civil rights.
Yep. Go ahead.
NDAA, all of it.
Bradley Manning is in prison.
Bradley Manning, Cindy.
Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Wars in Iraq and
Pakistan.
Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen.
Somalia.
Some of the things that I wrote down were occupations, loss of civil liberties, expansion of executive power, no accountability in Washington, D.C., national security letters, torture, wiretapping, kill lists, the bankrupting of this country, and so forth.
No concern for the climate.
No concern for the climate? Is that 9/11 related? I don't know.
Well, every time you bomb a bomb, you're polluting the air.
Right. Yep. If the event of 9/11 was not what we were led to believe, and I can guarantee you that it wasn't, then there's absolutely no justification for the post-9/11 world and everything that entails. Now, one of the problems that has happened because of 9/11 is a hatred towards Muslims and Arabs in general. As I said earlier, I wanted to see them bombed after 9/11. I have since learned otherwise. They are people no different than you or I. They have families that they care about. They have jobs that they work at. They have hobbies, etc., and so on. I see 9/11 as a crime. Muslims may have been involved in the attacks, but that doesn't mean it was a Muslim crime. You don't blame an entire religion, nationality, or ideology for the actions of a few. Otherwise, you will end up murdering thousands of people that had absolutely nothing to do with this crime, like we've seen in the Middle East. In my opinion, the myth of 9/11 is dangerous to everyone on the planet. The truth about 9/11 is dangerous only to a few. Now again, I see 9/11 as a crime, and as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. I believe elements within our government and other governments, along with people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, have more than earned the title of suspect for that crime. When you look at the actions of the Bush administration prior to 9/11, planning for the Iraq and Afghanistan occupations, the convenience of 9/11, and how they used it to further their agendas, and when you look at the lengths they went to make sure a real investigation never transpired, in my opinion, they have more than earned the title of suspect. Now, I have been doing this a very long time, and I probably know more about 9/11 than most people on the planet. However, I don't know what happened that day, or who was ultimately responsible. I wish I did, I wish the families were able to go through a 9/11 anniversary remembering their loved ones without remembering the unanswered questions as well. I wish the people of this country stood up and did the right thing. That is ultimately why I wrote my book, and that is why I'm here speaking to you today. After 9/11, we came together like never before. We were told to go shopping, but we did come together. It's time for us to come together again, but this time to do the right thing and direct our energies into finding out what happened that day and who was responsible so that that day could never again be used as it has been. I hope you take the time to read my book. I wrote it to help this country and the world. And it can only do that if you tell people about it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just so I don't forget, end the Fed, shut down Monsanto, seize BP's assets for destroying the Gulf, close Gitmo and Bagram, stop rape in the military, support soldiers suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, break up the media monopoly and reinstate the fairness doctrine, take money out of politics. Take money out of politics. There should be paper ballots. Don't take money away from the 9/11 first responders' health care. Reverse all legislation like the Patriot Act and the NDAA. Support our environment. There should be health care and education for everyone. The government doesn't have the right to tell anyone what they can and can't do with their bodies. Stop aid to the apartheid in Israel and end the blockade. Troops home from everywhere. Stop whistleblower retaliation and free Bradley Manning. Thank you.
And I got been arrested with her a handful of times, and I looked every minute of all of them, including after the Arlington moment when we laid down in front of the White House, and the 416 people after the September 25th Bring the Home Now tour. So I'm really great arrest, you know, as far as arrests go. But it's up to Cindy to tell you everything. She can fill you a lot better than I can. Miss Cindy Sheehan.
So nice to be introduced by somebody like that. Most people say, now somebody who doesn't need an introduction and they spend like an hour introducing me. But they read the wiki introduction. Bill just introduced me from his experience. So, hello. And thank you, John, for your talk. It just makes me want to just talk about about 9/11 and everything, but I actually do have my own thing. I'll try to tie a lot of stuff into it. So, a lot of you have heard me speak many times before, as has Bill, and when my son was killed in 2004, I can't believe it's been almost 9 years, I was what I considered liberal. You know, I was a Democrat, and I thought that was liberal. You know, but I lived in a very conservative Air Force town, so that actually is liberal. People come up to me in the town I live in, Vacaville now, they'll whisper to me, and I'll go, I didn't vote for Obama, I voted for Cynthia McKinney. You know, and so anyway, when Casey was killed, I blamed Bush, as most of you know. And I was probably his most famous stalker, like I was talking before. And I was telling John last night, now I almost feel sorry for him. You know, because I know now that the presidents of the United States, of course, are just puppets of the war machine. They're puppets of Wall Street. They're puppets of, I mean, you have a very comprehensive list. Sounds almost like my platform of things we need to do. They're the puppets of Monsanto and just like all Israel, just all kinds of, but of course, the administrations rarely if ever have the best interest of the people at heart, unless it happens to coincide with their own interests. or they just want to do something that's purely crass political manipulation. So now Bush, I was telling John, he must be sitting in his home, he lives in Dallas now, just going, dang, you know, Obama's doing the same thing I did. Nobody's protesting him. Nobody's saying he needs to be brought up on war crimes. Nobody's saying he needs to be impeached. Jeez, he must be taking it personally by now. And of course, there are still some people saying these things, but we don't get the, the same kind. I know I don't get the same kind of coverage for my protests that I did when Bush was president. As a matter of fact, when I decided that it wasn't a Republican problem, that it was a systemic problem, that's when I stopped being covered. I ran for Congress against Nancy Pelosi in 2008. I came in second. It was almost like I fell off the face of the freaking earth. And I never worked harder than I did before when I ran against her. And we had a very credible and serious campaign. And why would somebody who was only anti-Republican run against a Democratic Speaker of the House? Because she has the same, hi Dahlia.
Dahlia Watson, Dr. Dahlia Watson. Fabulous.
Sorry we're late. Hi. So nice to see you. So anyway, the story of my life since I left the Democratic Party in 2007. One of the very first things they did was approve funding for George Bush's wars. When I visited them in 2005, 2006, they would say straight to my face, Cindy, if you help us take back the House, we'll help you end the wars. And so I thought funding the wars was an awfully strange way of ending them. And so I left the party, didn't represent me or my views anymore. I got roundly attacked by people who supported me when I was just against Bush. I got attacked using the same words. I'm just an attention whore. That's what they called me. Oh, good riddance, attention whore. And so then I ran against Pelosi. But also in 2008, there was somebody else running for president. You might have heard of him. His name's Barack Obama. And the whole time, the whole campaign, I'm going, why? If you're for peace, why are you supporting him? He's saying he's going to send more troops to Afghanistan. He's saying he won't have any problem nuking Iran or North Korea if needed. Why, if you support peace, why are you supporting this person? This person who was a senator and voted for every war funding bill, voted for the Telecom Act that says it's okay for phone companies to keep our records. Things just, was one of the drivers behind the, was it $800 billion bailout of Wall Street in 2008? So, I lost, he won. And in 2009, 3 days after he was inaugurated, was his first drone bombing in North Waziristan, and it killed 36 civilians. So me being who I am, and I had probably, at this point, I probably had about 160,000 people on my email list because I had just run for Congress. And so I had a lot of people before, but after I had so many people. So I wrote to my list, I was like, wow, 3 days in office and he's already a war criminal. And so after that email, I had about 80,000 people on my list. I could just see them. Unsubscribe, 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 attacking me. Cindy, give him a chance. I was like, why? He didn't give those people in North Waziristan a chance. And even if you support him, you should be actively and vocally opposing these same things you opposed when Bush was president. Hello? And so I felt very lonely. You know, I saw my support dwindle, continuously dwindle. And I wrote a book in January, February of 2009 called Myth America, the 20 greatest myths of the robber class and the case for revolution. Because I was in bed one night just thinking, well, how come all my friends that were so smart when Bush was president became so dumb when Obama's president? You know? And it's because, I thought it was because of the myths that we're raised on, the propaganda that we're raised on. Like if America does something bad, it has good intentions. You know, America is the greatest nation in the universe. Not just in the world, in the universe. Because, you know, God damn it, we as Americans know that if there's another planet in another galaxy that has civilization, we already know we're better than that planet, right? Right? We don't have to know anything about that planet. We don't know anything about Canada. You know, we think Canadians hate their health care. We don't know anything about Mexico. I don't even know if I'm pointing in the right direction. Could be Mexico, could be Canada. You know, we think Mexicans want to come here and steal our crappy jobs.
Yep.
You know, they want to stay in Mexico and earn a living, right?
Yes.
And so, anyway, I wrote about this Myth America. My case for revolution actually was kind of a blueprint for Occupy. And of course, Camp Casey in Crawford, Texas was the first post 9/11 Occupy, right? So anyway, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle being a peace and justice activist since Obama's been elected. Fewer volunteers, fewer resources. And, oh, by the way, I have a radio show. It's called Cindy Sheehan Soapbox. And I still am very active, and I do a lot of writing and a lot of actions. So if you'd like to be on my email list, I'm going to pass these around. You can sign up for my email list. And so anyway, I started to think every 4 to 8 years in the United States, we have a so-called peaceful transition of power, right? Transfer of power. But since World War II, it's always been Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. The only time we've had two parties serve consecutively was Reagan-Bush. But Bush only lasted one term. And so I'm thinking that that's intentionally designed to keep at least half of the people supporting a diseased system. Right?
Yeah.
Well, half of the people who actually vote, which is a very small majority of the people in this country. When the politicians, they say they have a mandate, I'm like, you have a mandate? You got like 51% of 30% of the people who voted. It doesn't sound like a mandate to me. So anyway, how do we fix a system that is so entirely broken? Can it be fixed? Do we have to just completely dump it and start a new one? And that's my philosophy. That's my ideology. And what are my models for this? My models for this are the struggles in Latin America. And so I've been very fortunate since my son was killed. I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but you know, our sons are gone, and we can't change that, but we can try to make the world a better place because they're gone. And you know, I kind of have this little discussion with John too. He's always like, there's no justification for the post 9/11 world. Well, we should have realized there was no justification for the pre 9/11 world. You know, Bill Clinton killed more Iraqis than George Bush did. You know, with his sanctions and his weekly bombing runs, and his secretary of Marilyn Albright, she was the United Nations, our Secretary of the United Nations said it was worth it. Killing 500,000 children was worth it. You know, so, and on 9/11, and every day before 9/11, every day after 9/11, at least 30,000, 25 to 30,000 children die of starvation in this world. You know, it's a Holocaust on the poor. And so, I've been able to go to Venezuela several times. I've been able to go to Cuba several times. Of course, I'm a Cold War baby. I was born and raised in the Cold War, so what I was propagandized about Cuba is totally different than reality. And so I've been fortunate to be able to witness that. And when I first went to Venezuela in 2006, I was invited to the World Social Forum. I was very popular at that time. And so the Social Forum paid my way there, and I was able to meet several times with Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela. Yes, he's my best friend for life now. And he calls, you know how he used to call George Bush Mr. Danger? He called me Mrs. Hope. So I don't like that word hope, but it was nice coming from it was nice coming from him. But anyway, in 2010, I wanted to know more about him because, of course, I was roundly criticized and demonized for meeting with him. And Sean Hannity said, "You met with anti-American dictator Hugo Chavez." I'm like, how can he be anti-American? He is an American. You know, South Americans are Americans too. He's like, "Cindy, you know what I mean." I don't know what you, I never know what you mean, Sean. So let's just get that straight. And so anyway, what's her name? Nora O'Donnell. I was supposed to go on her show to talk about something. She introduced me as a woman who met with communist dictator Hugo Chavez. So instead of talking about what I was supposed to talk about, I talked about how he's not a communist, how he's not a dictator. You know, how he's a socialist and how he's been democratically elected many times. And blah, blah, blah. And then she finally goes, "Oh, Cindy, would you rather have Chavez as your president than Bush?" I was like, is that a trick question? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Hells to the yeah. I would rather have him as my president. And so anyway, in 2010, I was granted a request to go there to interview him for my radio show, Cindy Sheehan Soapbox. And so I got to spend not only time interviewing him, but interviewing some of his ministers, interviewing people in Venezuela, going to the communities, seeing the changes of the revolution. And I didn't see anything that I didn't like down in Venezuela. And after that trip, I thought, why can't we do that here in the United States? You know, why can't we have a socialist Bolivarian revolution that puts people's needs above corporate greed? You know, Venezuela has what they call socialism of the 21st century. There's still far too much capitalism in Venezuela for my taste, but they use the wealth of their country to improve the lives of every single Venezuelan. You know, you might have heard they have a lot of oil in Venezuela. They not only use it to improve Venezuelans' lives, but here. You know, the program of subsidized heating oil that Citgo. And all through Latin America, Chavez has used the resources of his country for very good, positive things. Cuba has been saved by Venezuela. Cuba sends, you know what Cuba does? Instead of sending troops and occupation, they send doctors and engineers and teachers to other countries. And so Chavez has traded his oil to Cuba for those things, because when he took over power in '98, there was a super high illiteracy rate. This year, Venezuela has met international literacy standards. So they've improved literacy in their country. Cuba is number 2 in literacy in the world. Number 1 is Georgia, not our state, Georgia. But the whole Soviet Georgia. 100%, and Cuba's like 99.9999999%. But they're evil. I was in Cuba last year, and Barack Obama said while I was in Cuba, I wonder if these things are mistakes, or if these things are just coincidences. I just happened to be in Cuba, and Obama makes a pronouncement about Cuba. He will talk to Cuba to normalize relations if Cuba changes their society. I was like, they have health care as a right, education from preschool to university as a right, housing as a right, food as a right. Here in the United States, all those things I just mentioned are privileges for the wealthy. I'm like, Castro did say, after Obama said this, he said he's a stupid man. And I was like, Castro, you should have said, I'll talk to Obama and normalize relations if you change society in America. Because not only are those things we consider human rights in in Cuba, we have those, but guess what? We don't occupy other people's countries. We don't have a over-bloated military-industrial complex like the United States does. And so I learned more about Venezuela, I learned more about Cuba, I learned more about Latin America. The people in Latin America are struggling not just politically, but they're struggling against GMOs. They're refusing to have their food supply taken over by Monsanto. They're struggling against the destruction of the rainforests. They're struggling against neoliberalism and the IMF coming in and saying that we're going to control your water supply. They tried to make it illegal for the people to use their own water to collect their rainwater. And the people of Latin America are saying, hell no. But they have a lot of administrations in Latin America that support them instead of supporting the corporations in the U.S. empire. So when I look at Latin America, I see progress for the 99%. I see progress for political and social struggles. And my daughter just got married a couple weeks ago. And she already has 3 kids, 3 of my darling grandchildren. I have 4 grandchildren, 3 boys and 1 girl. And they're the cutest grandbabies in the world. So don't even get into a discussion with me about it because you'll lose. And they're very wonderful. My daughter's been with this man for 7 years. Her baby daddy. I used to call him my shack-up-in-law, but now I can call him my son-in-law. And she got married the weekend of the Venezuelan elections. And I was invited to go down to observe the Venezuelan elections. I was like, why did you pick today? You could have picked any other day of the year, but you had to do it. She's like, well, call your friend Chavez and tell him to change the elections. I don't know where she gets that attitude from, really. So anyway, Chavez was reelected. And he has had a horrible year. Of course, recovered from cancer, got cancer twice, had many surgeries, is recovering. He looks great. And then, of course, the regularly scheduled Venezuelan presidential elections came up. And so it was the first time in Venezuela where the opposition worked together to present a coalition candidate against Chavez. So it was more of a battle for re-election than he's had before, but he overwhelmingly was re-elected. And people here are telling me, oh, but he's a dictator because this is his 3rd term. Okay, the Constitution of Venezuela was rewritten in 1999 by the people of Venezuela. and it was approved, or what's that word for approving a constitution?
Ratified.
Ratified, thank you. It was ratified by the people of Venezuela, and you know who can change it? The people of Venezuela. Who can change our constitution? It's an extremely difficult process. Yeah, well, the president can change it by just signing something, right? And so, but it's a very difficult process to amend our constitution. In Venezuela, I don't remember the year, maybe it was 2007, or maybe it wasn't. I don't know, but it's in my book. The people put up a referendum saying that they wanted to do away with term limits. And the people voted on it, and they approved that. It's not up to us to tell Venezuela how to run their country, especially if the people are the ones that are making the decisions and not the oligarchy from the top down like it used to be. And I used to be for term limits, but I want to argue to you that term limits are undemocratic. Because what if you get somebody in there you like? And the establishment's telling you that you can't vote for that person again, that that person can't run again. And term limits aren't, in the United States, we don't have term limits except for the one office, the presidency. And did we ever have term limits historically? That didn't happen until after Roosevelt, where we got the two-term limited president. And people then, they say, when I kind of remind them of all that, you know, that even if we still agree with term limits, it's not up to us to agree how Venezuela should organize their political society, right? And then they tell me, but their elections are illegitimate. You know, of course, dictators always win. And Venezuela has been certified by no less than Jimmy Carter as having 100% valid elections. 100% valid elections. Can we say that here in the United States? Can we say we can go to the voting booth and be assured that our vote will be counted the way we cast it? And even if it is, so what? You know, our votes really don't mean much. It's the Electoral College, which is hugely elitist and undemocratic, right? So just seeing the advances in Venezuelan society, where since Chavez has been president, the income gap has closed by 50%. Our income gap keeps widening. The United States has the largest income inequality than any other first world nation. But in Venezuela, they're making that close because of free access to health care, free access to education, food, a basic guaranteed income. You didn't say you wanted that. That's in our platform. We want a basic guaranteed income, so people can retire at a reasonable age and not have to eat cat food. You know, so people can have a baby and take as much time as they want off. You know, my daughter, with her baby, she got 6 weeks off at like $60 a week. What's that? What is that? We're supposed to be pro-family? That's not pro-family, that's anti-family. You know what? We would have full employment in this country if we had a basic guaranteed income. You know, because I could say, hey, I could take a year off and write another book. You know, and so but that's what they have in Venezuela, and they have food subsidies. And so I see that, and I see a country that just like, I'm doing the math really quickly in my head, 14 or 15 years ago was mostly illiterate. And I see the people empowered. I visited one community called San Agustin. And San Agustin was a very poor slum up the side of a very steep hill. Here in the United States, of course, rich people live on hills. In poor countries, poor people live on hills because there's no access to roads or water or sanitation or electricity most of the time. And so San Agustin was very poor, and it was almost like this steep climb of many steps to get to your house. If you had to go to school, down and up the mountain. If you had to go to the grocery store, down and up the mountain. And so St. Augustine said, we need a cable system. And so from the time St. Augustine had their community council and said, we need a cable system, to the time that the government worked with them to clear a pathway, to build better housing for the people of St. Augustine, to build a metro cable, 3 years. And the people said we need it, the government financed it, and they hired people from that barrio to build it. And it cost 10 cents a day to ride. And so I rode up it, and they very cleverly said, okay, now let's walk down. And walking down, by the time we got to the bottom, my legs were rubber. So I couldn't imagine. I was like, you all must have buns of steel. I couldn't imagine walking up and down that thing, like whenever you needed something. Pregnant women, women with small children, old women, sick people, you know, anytime you wanted to leave, you had to walk up and down that steep hill. So I just think it would be wonderful if people in the United States, and part of the reason I wrote this book was, of course, to dispel all the myths about Hugo Chavez and his Bolivarian Revolution, but what would be to inspire something like that here in the United States. You know, something where we could, for once, the people could have the power. You know, people always say, let's take back our country. But when did we ever have our country?
Really?
You know, restore America. That was Ron Paul's, I don't know if there's any Ron Paul fans that I'm going to insult right now. his slogan was restore America. I'm like, to where? To when? Back to when white men, were the only ones that could vote? You know, back to where we had forced slavery, and when we were slaughtering the indigenous people. I don't know, where do you want to restore us? I don't want to restore anything. I want to rebuild something that's healthy for us in what the Occupy calls the 99%. And with the current political situation and social situation, I'm all for let's take money out of politics. I'm all for that. I'm all for reforming politics and whatever. But the people that write those laws are the people that benefit from those laws, and they know how to get around those laws. So when they want to reform healthcare, who do they call in to write the healthcare bill? The healthcare industry. You know, and so I think reform is better than nothing, but I think what we need is this grassroots political and social revolution to take the power finally where it belongs in the people. And so along those lines, I joined the Peace and Freedom Party in California. The Peace and Freedom Party is a socialist, feminist, and environmental party, and it's for peace and freedom. I like those things. And so I was going to run for governor. I almost said I was going to run for president of California. I'm going to run for president of California. And talk about socialist revolution. You talk about how California could lead the way in narrowing that income gap. I'm born and raised in California. We used to have free education all through university. And you know, when we had free education, corporations paid a minimum of 35%. Now they pay around 12%. You know, so I'm like, tax the crap out of them. Tax the crap out of the 700,000 millionaire or above households we have in California. Redistribute that wealth. Build up the social programs again. And people say, but if we tax the corporations, they'll leave. And I'm just like, bye-bye. You know, your corporation belongs to the people of California anyway. So you go, we'll just keep your corporation here, if you don't mind. And we'll put it in the democratic control of the workers. And so, but then I got asked to run for vice president of the United States. Not California, but the United States. And my running mate is comedian actress Roseanne Barr. But in my defense, I wanted to run to talk about socialist revolution and to inspire people in that way. And I know that socialism is a dirty word in the United States. And it's a hugely misunderstood word too, by the way, as is capitalism and communism. So part of my book is to define those terms and tell people what it's really about. And it's really about taking care of people and not taking care of the 1%, is what socialism is about. And I make my living off of writing and doing my radio show and being an activist. I'm still an activist. I'm very lucky that I get to do this 24/7, but it's not an easy life, of course. Like, we got arrested, 15 of us got arrested in February at Vandenberg Air Force Base. I used to spend a lot of time in the East Coast, but activism used to be better funded when Bush was president, right? And so now I tell Nancy and Ray and Bill and John and all you guys, you're in the trenches here, I'll be in the trenches over there in California. And so we got arrested, 15 of us got arrested at Vandenberg Air Force Base protesting the test launch of the Minuteman missile. Minuteman missile. And so, and then of course they launched them to the Mariana Islands, which the people there don't want that, they don't want that happening. And we were supposed to have a trial on Wednesday in Santa Barbara, all 15 of us. So I don't have a car, and I live about six hours away from Santa Barbara by car, anyway. And so I had to rent a car, and drive down there, and I was 20 minutes away from Santa Barbara when my attorney called me and said, the government is dismissing all your charges. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to go home then. I was going to do like the attorney's like, don't you have an event tonight? I would have been like all the way back to Salinas before I remembered I had an event to speak at. But you know why they dismissed the charges? Because we wanted them to provide the criteria and their procedures for arresting activists. And the Air Force wouldn't provide it. So they had to dismiss the charges against us because the Air Force refused to provide that criteria. And then I just went home. It was like a really long, super hard day. I would have loved to be on trial though, and we wanted to put the nukes on trial, but we didn't get that opportunity. And then yesterday was a really long, super hard day getting here to Philadelphia. You would think like I had to sail a boat around the Horn of South America or something to get here. It took so freaking long. So anyway, I really, would prefer socialist revolution. But the thing that I think is more realistic at this point is just convincing people who think the same way I do that there's no solution in the politics of the Democrat-Republican monopoly. That we're not going to find a solution there. And even some of my co-defendants I was on trial with advocate this strategy of voting for Obama in swing states. And I think that's so damaging to our credibility and to the movement. They say things like, we hate Obama's drone program, we hate Obama's support of Wall Street, we hate Obama's persecution of whistleblowers, but vote for him. That doesn't make sense. And besides, there's just no solution. That's not where our solution lies outside the ballot box, I think. And so it would be almost better for the peace movement if Romney won. Then we might have more comrades, and then the wars would be bad again. Obama still has, made it hard for women, especially poor women in this country. He's made it hard for women in other countries with his targeted assassination program. He decided that he was judge, jury, and executioner of an American citizen and his 16-year-old son, and their comrade, Samir Khan. In what universe is that right? You know, now people are putting this poor girl that got shot in Afghanistan by the Taliban, or was it Pakistan? Pakistan by the Taliban. You know, I'm against that. Trust me. I'm against what happened to her. But to put her up as a poster child of we need to care about her but not care about Obama's victims, you know, it's like, oh, let's write songs to her. Let's put her picture on the news, you know, let's do all this, and then we can be distracted off of all the people Obama's killing, you know, and so, and if Obama's reelected, then we can say, but you know what, now we can be against these things again because he doesn't have a chance of being reelected. Then they'll say, but you want a Republican in 2016? No, I don't want a Republican in 2016. I want revolution. I want people to wake up and realize that unless we take these matters into our own hands and make things better for us and our communities, then it's not going to happen. And so that's what I'm hoping that this book can be like a
clarion call.
You know, it's like every legitimate movement those Democrats co-opted. You know, Move On moves in and just fucks it up. And so they did it to the anti-war movement in 2005, 2006. They used it to elect Democrats, and look where we are right now. They're trying to do it to the Occupy movement. You know, a lot of the Occupy movements, not all of them, because you just can't co-opt a movement that's not centralized, have been co-opted to elect Democrats. So we need a nonpartisan people's movement that encompasses everybody. You know, not just, you know, can't limit ourselves to only Democrats or only Republicans or only socialists or only blacks or whites or gay or straight. You know, we need to have an inclusive, to recognize that all of these issues, all the ones that John just made a list of, are very important and very legitimate, and that we need to solve them using different means and different people that got us into the problems. And it's just an entrenched problem that's only been a problem since like 1600 something. I always love how, you know, on Columbus Day, they're all like, 1492, Columbus discovered America. I was like, well, what about all the people who were here already? You know, I think they discovered it first. And so anyway, yeah, it's an entrenched problem, and of course it came over, it was imported over here from other lands too, that are also the problems. But it can take an entrenched effort, recognizing there's 300 million Americans and just a few of the 1%. You know, what if there was 100 people in this room? What if, like, one of those people was a jackass? You know, and tried to say, you know, all you 99, give me all your money, give me all your property, work for me, be my slave, let me exploit your labor. Do you think those 99 people would agree with that one jackass? No. So why do we just let a handful of people destroy billions of people on this planet? I think billions against a handful are overwhelming odds in our favor. You know, but like John said, we have a media that's co-opted, but we also have a very good alternative media that a lot of us in this room have used very effectively.